Keith Smith from Spotrac and the NBA front office show is here now to help me go through some of these contract extensions. And I think we got to start with the Rockets because I think some of these were the most surprising. Keith, we have Alperen Şengün signing 5 years, $185 million, and then Jalen Green, 3 years, $106 million, a player option in that third year, a 10% trade kicker, which I think is going to be important in terms of what this contract means for the Houston Rockets. But let's start with Şengün, though, first. What did you make of the Rockets being able to get this guy on this kind of deal?
Yeah, I was a little surprised. I thought Houston may go the Philadelphia-ish path of keep the guy with the low cap hold, create a bunch of cap space, and move forward that way. That was a little more complicated for them because that would have meant we got to move on from Fred VanVleet. That's obviously not something they want to do. As an aside, I still think there's a chance we see VanVleet opt out or they opt VanVleet out next year, but then sign him to a long-term deal that spreads the money out a little bit. I know we're going to talk about Rudy Gobert, but like a kind of a cousin to what happened with Gobert and his extension. But with Şengün, there's two really interesting parts to this. One, 5-year extension with the player option. Those have become extremely rare for rookie scale deals. The last two guys who got them, Jason Tatum and Donovan Mitchell, who got them when they were already established all-stars. So that part's a little bit odd, but also the fact that it's a non-max deal. So that kind of tells me, I'm guessing the Rockets said, hey, will you take this much money? And Şengün's side said, we'd like a max with a player option. And then they said, well, how about we do our money, but we give you the player option, and that's the middle ground. So I'm a big fan of Şengün as a player. I'm a big fan of the contract. I think it'll be, really good, for him and the Rockets both, but it definitely a surprising one, the way it ended up structured.
Yeah. I mean, you look at the people that were in Şengün's draft class too, and you could argue, I don't know, you could argue that he might be the most productive player in that class so far through his career, right? I mean, it's Cade Cunningham, Jalen Green, obviously, who's on his team, Evan Mobley, Scotty Barnes, Jalen Suggs. A lot of these guys signed deals. Franz Wagner is also part of that class. And then you had Şengün picked in the middle of the first round and ended up being a huge hit for the Rockets. So to get him, I think if you're a Rockets fan, you're like, wow, we got this guy at, an average annual value of $36, $37 million, whatever the math comes out to. And you look at that compared to somebody like even like Cade Cunningham, who, is sort of the cornerstone of the Detroit Pistons rebuild here, making a lot more money than Şengün is on these rookie contract extensions. Even Franz Wagner, who's basically a max at this point, and that feels like a pretty good deal for Houston. Now, is Şengün somebody that you're going to build the whole franchise around? I think there's still questions about that, but in terms of what he's been able to do and what he's been able to prove, I mean, he's as proven as any of these other guys in his class.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the one guy I would probably say put a little ahead is Scotty Barnes, but that's just because he's already made an all-star team. But one other differentiator too, because this is not a max deal, that also means there's no language in there that if Şengün makes all NBA, that he escalates to higher than a 25% of the cap max, which that's something that Cunningham got, Mobley got, Wagner got, and Barnes got. So I don't know that it's crazy to say Alperen Şengün makes all NBA, especially if the 65 game rule comes into play. And we did see last year, even in the new positionless voting, a lot of voters still did the traditional like center, two forwards, two guards. Maybe they mixed the forwards and guards a bit, but almost everybody still voted 3 center-ish guys across the team. So I don't know that it's insane to say he makes that. And I just pulled it to make sure I had the numbers right. Over the life of this contract, he's going to be sitting at 20% of the cap-ish amount there. So that just gives you a sense as we project the cap to go up. This will look even better as a non-max extension for the Rockets as it goes. So I think this is wonderful for Houston. And then I think for Şengün, the win is obviously gets that player option, and he'll get back out onto the market when he has a chance to cash in on one more big deal, likely in his career.
So there's a lot to go into this, right? I mean, you mentioned the fact that, all right, by doing this deal now with Şengün, it kind of takes them out of the free agency market or limits their flexibility in terms of getting on the free agency market next summer. But at the same time, that long-term flexibility of locking this guy into what could end up being a below average or a below market deal, because if Şengün goes out and makes All-Star, All-NBA this year, he would have been. I mean, we're talking about a max guy if he didn't have a contract next summer, and so you kind of lock him into a better deal. The flip side of that too is this Jalen Green contract, which is fascinating. So let's just jump into it. I mean, if this Şengün deal could look like one of the best bargains in the NBA, this Jalen Green contract could go either direction, right? Like if he ends up being the star, he's like, wow, they got this guy at $30 million a year. But to say this guy has been worth $30 million a year so far in his career would be crazy. I mean, maybe a third of that based on his on-court production. I mean, it's been a pretty rocky start to Jalen Green's career, very up and down. But and correct me if I'm wrong right now. So by doing this, because he was a top 5 pick, his cap hold next year would have been basically the same as what the contract is going to be. So it doesn't really impact Houston's flexibility on the free agent market next summer, but they're locked into a really interesting contract right now.
Yeah, this one by itself doesn't really change much for the Rockets. It's the combination of him and Şengün that basically says, all right, they're not going the cap space route. They're going to keep their guys, barring some really unexpected trades over the next few months here ahead of the trade deadline. So I think the one challenge with the Rockets with Jalen Green becomes and this is a point Seth Partnow, I think, was making on Twitter as this was playing out, was how do you win this if you're the Rockets? And I think, and maybe I'm putting words in his mouth, so I'll say it. In my opinion, the challenge becomes if Green pops and is awesome, well, he'll opt out in 2 years, and then you're going to have to re-sign him on a team where now you have, as much as Şengün's on a good value contract, you've got him. You're going to have re-signed at Jabari Smith Jr. You're going to have to re-sign Tari Eason. You're going to have what other veterans you have in place, and that's going to be a challenge. If he's not good, let's say he reverts to the Jalen Green of most of his career, now you're kind of stuck with it because he'll just opt in for $36 million, and then you're stuck with a contract that doesn't look so good. So it's a super interesting structure. I think it was Brian Windhorst pointed out that this looks like it was designed as a tradable contract, and I think there's definitely truth in that. I think there's a world where with the scenario I played out doesn't end up mattering for the Rockets because he won't be there in a couple years, and a lot of that's going to depend on how do Reed Shepherd and Amin Thompson develop? What do they turn into? If those guys really develop, well, now do you need Jalen Green? Where are we headed with that? But this is Jalen Green in March of last season earned this contract because it was you can play normal winning basketball on a good team, not just this run up and down, throw up crazy stuff like you did the entirety of his first 2 years, where it looked like me and you got 3 friends and played pickup in NBA games. And just, I jokingly said you were as likely to see a great play as you were to see some lady get beamed in the head with the ball 8 rows deep in the stands because they were just all over the place. And Green was a big part of that.
I hate this contract, and I hate this for the Houston Rockets. And I was gonna kind of get into this and be like, talk me into this, Keith. And it doesn't sound like you're gonna be able to.
Yeah, it's hard.
It's difficult, and I agree. How does this work out? And I know that CAA, who represents Jalen Green, is out here being like, there's never been a contract ever signed like this before, and all these things. It's all right, cool. There's a reason for that, because your client isn't worth the max, and because I guess Houston looked at this and they're like, I don't know, $30 million. You got the player option on that third. It's only 3 years. I don't know. Screw it. Let's just do it. And that 10% trade kicker is the interesting part to me too, because it feels like that's built for Jalen Green to get traded. But that's a good thing for him. I think that makes it maybe more difficult to trade him, and even if you wanted to potentially. So it's a weird contract. It's hard for this to work out. And yeah, he had that great run in March, but we know this. March basketball is very different than the larger sample size of an entire career. And when I'm making a huge financial decision like this with a Houston Rockets team who's everybody loves this young core, but when you have a great young core, it makes these decisions even more important because you could screw it up and be like, oh my God, well now we can't get off of Jalen Green. Now we have to trade one of the good guys that we like maybe 2 years down the road. And now you're kind of resetting things. So I don't really know why. I wish the Rockets would have just said, you know what? If Jalen Green pops this year and he ends up being worth $40 million a year, fine. That's great. Like to me, if I'm the Rockets, I'm kind of rooting for that, but I just can't really figure out why they did this other than it's sort of the 11th hour. It's right before the deadline. CAA kind of maybe said, you know what, we'll do it for 30 with the player option on the third and throw that trade kicker in there. And then maybe the Houston was just like, oh, we don't have enough time to really think about it. Yes, I don't know. I have no idea why they would have done this. I think it was an awful decision.
Yeah, I think the challenge is you removed all of your own leverage, because what you would have kind of hung over his head was the specter of restricted free agency of, hey, even if let's say he came out and it was like, holy crap, this dude's an all-star now and everything else, fine. Even if the Brooklyn Nets, the only team with meaningful cap space, parachute in with a monster offer sheet for you, we'll just match it, because it is what it is. Yeah, you would have got the player option in year 4, because that's how it would have been structured if it got to an offer sheet. And we'll talk about that maybe with a couple guys who didn't extend. But it is, you did it anyway. You gave him a player option a year earlier. So it's just a weird structure. It's kind of, I look at a Rockets team that, as they've rebuilt in the wake of trading James Harden, has kind of nailed every step along the way. Like they hit on their draft picks. They got the right kind of guys there. They added really smart veteran signings. Yeah, did they overpay a couple guys? Sure, but that's, you have to when you're a rebuilding team. And they didn't overpay them on super long-term deals that are impossible to work around. But now this was the one where, you got Şengün on such a sweetheart extension that looks great. And then this was just a little weird. And that feels like, all right, if this is your one misstep, I'm not going to make a huge deal of it. I wonder if they're looking at it and saying, hey, in 2 years, if he opts out, we may be like, cool, man, we got Reed Shepherd, we got Thompson.
Right.
They're ready to step in and go as our backcourt. You're out. Van Vliet's transitioned into a third guard role. And we're going to invest that money elsewhere on the roster to improve around what will at that point likely be a Şengün fully led team. So we'll see. But I'm with you. It's definitely one of the odder decisions that was made here in the last couple of weeks.
Not a death knell to the rebuild at all, to your point, right? Like there's ways it's still a relatively cheap roster. You don't have to pay all the other young guys yet, but it just feels like a thing. Like a year from now, we're going to be talking about how do the Rockets deal with this Jalen Green contract? It's like one of those contracts that are signed immediately, and you're like, that doesn't look great anymore. On the other side of it, and I think this is what you were referencing, the Warriors, fascinating stuff. So they signed Moses Moody, 3-year, $39 million rookie scale contract extension. Awesome, good for them. Tidy business. Move that along. The interesting part with what the Warriors didn't do was with Jonathan Kuminga. Jonathan Kuminga made it very clear he wants a max contract. Him and his representation believe that he's capable of being a max player, and that's what he wanted. The Warriors were clearly not going to go there because they're still not really sure what Jonathan Kuminga is as a player, kind of how the Rockets were with Jalen Green. And yet here are the Warriors standing pat, not doing anything. They did not sign him to an extension. Kuminga will be a restricted free agent next summer. And I thought that was really smart, even as risky as it might be for the Warriors. I think it was smart. It's what I wish Houston would have done with Jalen Green. I think there's value in just saying, you know what, we don't really know what to do here, and cap space and how we use our money is so crucial in this new second apron world that we're just going to stand pat. We're not going to worry about it. Maybe a little bit of like Jordan Poole buyer's remorse seeped into this, like where they're like, you know what, we already did this once, it didn't work out. What did you think about the Warriors not doing anything on Kuminga?
Yeah, it's that last part where I think that ties in. I think there's also, we just dug out of like what was going to be years of second apron challenges. Mm-hmm. Like, let's not immediately jump right back in with both feet by handing out a max deal here to a guy who is, in my opinion, in a vacuum, I would have given Kuminga the max and not thought too much about it. He's less proven than guys like Barnes, Mobley, or Wagner, who I think are kind of his comps in the class. But I think you saw it last year. Like, it was not just, oh, well, he got way more minutes. He did get more minutes, but it wasn't just that. He got more efficient. He cut down on some of the contested stuff. Really played really, really well. And I'm very, very high
good on-ball defender.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, he's kind of got everything you want in like a combo forward, right? He's got that size. I'm a little turned off by the whole I'm a small forward thing. Like, dude, who cares, man? Like, it doesn't really matter. Like, you're a forward. Like, this is 2024. There's very few power forwards and small forwards now. You're either a big or you're like a combo forward or a wing, and you're like a combo forward. But whatever.
Hey, good for him though. The Warriors are playing him at small forward now.
That's it. Yeah, they are with
Draymond
Andrew Wiggins
Chase,
shoehorned in as a giant two guard, which I mean, it worked, but they also played Portland and destroyed a pretty woeful Blazers team opening night. But yeah, I get why the Warriors held. This is one where if I could jump in my time machine and get to June, July, we're starting free agency. I think Sean Marks is sitting there, but he might already have that offer sheet typed out, ready to go. We've seen him do it before, right? Where it's like, hey, how I'm going to try to do this is I'll throw out offer sheets, because if we land the guy, awesome. If we don't, what did we tie up cap space for? It's not like we missed out on anything else. We'll just move on to the next guy. And that's where I do wonder if the Warriors are going to get forced into giving him a max deal that then is a little more advantageous to his side than maybe to theirs, because it's only going to be like a 3+1, because that's what the offer sheet will come in at. But it's not the end of the world. They'll figure it out. And this gives you a little bit more time to see, all right, hey, yeah, maybe there is a Wiggins trade that materializes over the course of the year, and they move off him and they don't take on a bunch of long-term salary in that. And then it's like, all right, you know what? Now we feel better about giving Kuminga a big contract right away. Because remember, the important thing, you can now negotiate with your own guys the day after the NBA Finals. So that's huge, because they'll have that window before anybody else can. Because let's face it, we all know no one would ever talk to anyone early to get any sense of, what offers might be there. Right. Should you wait until the legal talking period? Like, but it's that is a little bit of an advantage, at least, hey, we can get this done right now with you on a deal, and we don't even have to play the game of restricted free agency in a couple more weeks.
So speaking of flexibility here, I think it also opens up the flexibility to trade Jonathan Kuminga before the trade deadline also. We know that the Warriors had they signed him the extension, obviously that gets a lot more complicated. So the Warriors have been out here. I mean, there was a story written in The Athletic the other day about it. They were chasing Lauri Markkanen and chasing Paul George, thinking that perhaps they can even get both of those guys. It's not been a secret that they're looking at the Lakers and saying, like, LeBron, is he going to stay there forever if he ever wants to pair with Steph? Like, they've been doing everything just short of tampering in terms of publicly trying to say, LeBron, you'd be welcome in San Francisco. They're going to be aggressive. They're going to be very aggressive between now and February. That much has been made very clear. And so Kuminga is their best trade chip. Had they signed him to the extension, I do think that complicates it. And of course, I think Mike Dunleavy and the rest of this front office had to be thinking about that when they were looking at the possibility of Jonathan Kuminga signing him to an extension. Now, my question is, if Kuminga's representation came to the Warriors and said, we'll do the Jalen Green deal, $30 million a year, player option, 3 years, short term, I wonder what the Warriors would have said then. Because they might have just done what Houston did, throw their hands up and just say, you know what, let's just do this anyway. I don't know. Maybe they would have prioritized the flexibility.
Yeah, I kind of hope they wouldn't have and said,
same.
You know what, they're probably not going to say this to his reps and him, but I think internally when they sit down and say, let us talk about it, I think they look at each other and say, we'd rather have him as a trade chip, because Jalen Green is, to go back to him, he's functionally untradeable right now in the moment, because what happens on these rookie scale deals is the poison pill provision kicks in. So you count as one salary on the outgoing side, but the incoming side for the team acquiring, you count at way more. It's usually double or triple the amount. And that becomes a challenge, right? Like it's very, very hard. You almost have to pull in a third team that has either exceptions or cap space to make it work. And that can be very difficult. So if I was the Warriors, I would have said, nah, we're not interested in that. It's either going to be a long-term deal, more like Şengün's, where it's not quite the max and we see a little bit of savings on this, or let's let it play out. Let's see what it looks like in July after we've had a long season and one more year of, you do it again or even better. Yeah, then we're happy to give you the deal ourselves. But yeah, that was one of the more interesting ones that didn't get done.
So I got 4 more for you here, and you just tell me which one's most interesting or the one that you feel like talking about right now. We've got Jalen Johnson and the Hawks agreeing to a 5-year, $150 million deal. Trey Murphy, 4 years, $112 million with New Orleans. Jalen Suggs and the Magic, 5 years, $150.5 million. And then Corey Kispert with the Wizards, 4 years and $54 million. Which one of those do you want to talk about?
Yeah, I think Jalen Suggs, because I
My man.
think Murphy and Johnson those are kind of, makes sense, right? There's just not much there to dig into. And then with Corey Kispert, a couple people are like, what a ridiculous overpay. And that tells me, nah, no one's watching the Wizards that isn't a Wizards fan over the last couple of years, because he's good. He gets tagged with he's just a white shooter, right? And he's not that, he is that, but he's that plus. He can do some stuff off the dribble. Exactly. Yeah, plays with a headband. Yeah, he's got a little funk to his game. He's fun. But Jalen Suggs, typical Magic, right? They got creative with this. They front loaded the contract, loaded it up. It was initially reported as having a team option. It does not have a team option on the final year with this, which that part is a little surprising. Orlando loves their team options, but front loading it. And why to me that is so important is you have Franz on a max now. Everybody knows they signed Caldwell Pope, but then they also re-signed everybody else that were their own free agents pretty much, except for Markelle Fultz. And then Paolo next summer is going to sign his max extension, which that's probably, I'm guessing, going to be a super max, the 30%, because that's going to jump up because he's going to be an all-NBA guy. So when they'll have him and Franz on a max, a bunch of other guys signed, as those contracts go up, Suggs is going the other way. And the important thing is those descending contracts are great as long as the last year you can still extend the player off of that last year at a number that makes sense for them. If you go too low, that's when it turns into guys like you and I are like, well, he's not going to extend because there's just not enough money. So he's going to free agency. And that's where that enters a bit of unknownness here. The number's still high enough for Suggs at the end where you're still talking, you're going to get him in the range of 35 to 40 million. And that should be enough to take care of him.
I love that the Magic got this done. It was a little, it was giving me a little bit of anxiety. I'm like, are they going to get this done? Because to me, Jalen Suggs is so fundamentally important to what it is that they do. He's not their best player, but you could argue in terms of their identity, maybe their most important player. I mean, everything the Orlando Magic is doing is built on defense, and not just defense, like hard-nosed, up in your grill defense. Like, I am going to bother you and you are going to hate playing us defense. And Jalen Suggs, again, not their best player. And what I'm saying right now isn't like not the most valuable thing in the league, but I think maybe the hardest thing in the league to find is a guard who can defend his position at an elite level. There's just not a lot of these guys. It's like Drew Holiday, Caruso, Suggs, like end of list. Maybe there's a couple maybe
Derek
other
White,
guys.
I would throw
Derek White,
too.
Sure, other guys too. But like it's not a long list, and it's really hard to find these guys. And so had they let him enter restricted free agency next year, I was like, somebody's gonna there's a contender that's gonna pay this guy. Like somebody's gonna pay this guy. And especially when you look at the success that the Celtics have had with guys just like Jalen Suggs, I think you would have had a copycat scenario potentially happening there. But I'm glad that the Magic got this done, and you already outlined the stuff with the contract, how it descends and all that stuff. It gives them a little bit of flexibility, but don't trade Jalen Suggs, Orlando. He's really good. Don't trade him. Don't trade him.
I don't think he's not going anywhere. I would say too, another thing is he fits perfectly with Paolo and Franz as a combo guard. He's got just enough playmaking juice himself. He can bring the ball up the floor and set kind of the offense, then pitch it off to them and then go do whatever he's going to do. And then there's moments when it's because they play very few meaningful minutes without Paolo or Franz on the court. He can be the second guy who not necessarily like, oh my gosh, they've got this three-headed monster, but just another guy who can get you shots. He showed a lot more on ball creation. And then the shooting, if the shooting jump is real, well, then this is a definite no-brainer. I look at it as, I think Orlando in a lot of ways is building in the mold of what Boston did, which is we're going to have two big playmaking wings that can do a lot of different stuff, including be our primary scorers. Then we're going to have guards who fit around them and play defense and can make shots there. And then we're going to really, because they're really tasking Wendell Carter, shoot 3-pointers. We want you to shoot them. If you're open, take them. And I think they're really trying to grow into what Boston was with a team it's the Celtics now, especially after the ridiculous shooting on opening night, everybody's like their offense is just a machine, but at their base, they are still a defensive team that is just a mess to play against. And we saw that with Orlando. They had Miami completely stifled.
Oh yeah.
The Heat, it was like that third quarter, there was moments where it's like, well, we're done. Like, we don't have an answer for any of what they're doing, because anytime, all right, we picked out the guard on the switch, and now the guard's up in my face 30 feet, and I can't even put the ball on the floor. So it doesn't matter that I have 4 inches on him. I can't get to where I need to get to get a good shot. It was like that. I think Orlando, the other part where Boston, like, lock up our guys. If we've got guys who we like that fit and are good, we're going to lock them up. And but we're going to lock them up to contracts. They're all reasonable. So if we need to move one later, we'll move one later. I mean, they're just like the Celtics 2 years behind, 3 years behind, I guess, is especially on the salary sheet, because they're not going to pay $500 million in salary and tax penalties. Not probably anytime, but definitely not anytime soon.
Yeah, I wrote about the Celtics Magic comp the other day, and it's a great comparison. It makes a lot of sense to just look at how they're built and everything like that. I love the fact that they're stress testing Paolo and Franz. They said, hey, we're not going to go out and get Anthony Simons, Malik Monk, or like a ball handler that's going to take. We actually need you to go through these hard times and become a better playmaker, because that's how we're going to become a better team. That's how we're going to reach our ceiling, even if we're not going to be necessarily as good as maybe we could have been had we made some other offseason moves. Jalen Suggs, you already mentioned the shooting. 40% from 3 last year. I still don't think anybody trusts him to make a 3-pointer if their life was dependent on it. He still needs to prove that. But defensively, I was in the arena for the Heat season opener, and what Jalen Suggs did to Terry Rozier, I mean, he should be arrested for assault. Like, it was crazy what that guy did. I mean, he's going to be first team all defense probably for a few times in his career. He's awesome. I'm a big Jalen Suggs fan, if that has not been made clear already. 2 more non-rookie contracts that we have to discuss here. Aaron Gordon picks up his player option for next season at $22-ish million, and then extends off that 3 years, $103.6 million. And then we have Rudy Gobert, 3 years, $110 million. Opposite, he turns down the $47 million player option for next year, so that's going to save Minnesota about $12-ish million next year. It locks Gobert, who's 32 years old, into a good deal through his age 35 season. Let's start with Gordon, I guess. I'm really more interested in the Gobert part, but Aaron Gordon, is there anything I'm missing there other than, hey, good deal for everybody all around?
No, I don't think so. I think he has proven to be a dream fit. As someone who watched every game he played here in Orlando in person, it still is like, there's still a little bit of me like, man, I wish this could have happened for the Magic with him. It worked out obviously well for all parties involved, but the difference was they don't have Nikola Jokic, right? And Gordon has proven to be the ideal front court partner. And I think what some people missed is last season, he kind of morphed into their backup center too. He played about 10-15% of his minutes, depending on which tracking you like to use there. But he really, that was kind of his role quite a bit, as they didn't have anybody they were comfortable with. And I think that's going to be increasingly important for them, especially as you look at some of these teams in the West, being able to just, all right, we got Jokic for his 35 minutes when we need it. We can plug Gordon in for 15 minutes and we're fine. Like, we're good at the center spot, even if, Dario Saric doesn't work out, or insert, whoever, Deron Holmes, when he's healthy next season. Even if those guys aren't quite what we need them to be, we're okay with that. And that's a sneaky part of this. But yeah, he's really good. And it's always good to have guys, again, we've said this about a couple other players, guys who just know what their role is. Like, my role is to play defense, run the floor, rebound, not really complain if I don't get a bunch of shots and touches. I just got to do my thing. And that's so huge when you have already 3 primary on-ball scorers, playmakers in Jokic, Murray, and Porter. You just need an elite role player, and that's what Aaron Gordon is.
Yeah, I said after they signed Jamal Murray to that max, you're paying for the chemistry more than the player, even though Jamal Murray is a good player. Aaron Gordon, obviously a very good player. His chemistry with Jokic is also very under-discussed, because we always focus on the Jamal Murray-Jokic 2-man game, but what Aaron Gordon has developed in terms of the lob game and all that kind of stuff it's right up there with what Jokic and Murray has developed. So and now between these 2 deals, Aaron Gordon and Rudy Gobert, they kind of both, They feel to me like the final scene in a movie where the movie's kind of all over the place, and you're like, I don't really know what's the plot? Like, what are we really talking about here? And then the final scene kind of everything clicks into place, and you're like, oh, that's what this movie is about. That's what they were trying to tell me. Both of these deals with Aaron Gordon and Rudy Gobert, it kind of makes the whole offseason for Denver and for Minnesota click into place a little bit. Like, oh, I get it. That was the end goal. So with the Nuggets, obviously they let Kentavious Caldwell-Pope walk. They got a lot of flack for that. The talent drain over the last couple of years has been well documented. But with locking in Aaron Gordon here for this contract, you say, okay, they got Murray, they got Gordon, they already had Michael Porter Jr. under contract. Jokic is obviously under contract. No matter what, and the Celtics are even going to face this in a year. There's going to become a time where they were going to have to let one of these guys go, and they looked at everything that was in front of them, and they said, KCP, you're the weak link. I'm sorry. And so they ended up going with these guys, and now there's still some other things that they got to do, and maybe they could have waited a year and signed KCP. I don't know, but not necessarily to defend letting KCP walk, but this is at least makes it look like it makes sense. And then with Gobert, it's very similar, right? Basically, the Timberwolves decided between Gobert and Karl-Anthony Towns. They decided with Gobert. So they trade Karl-Anthony Towns, and then a week later, they lock Gobert into this deal, which probably not going to look great in the last year of this contract, maybe even like the second to last year of this contract. But the Minnesota is also saying, we don't really care. The cap is going up. He's making $12 million less than he was going to make next year. That takes us below the second apron, I believe, maybe the first apron.
It'll be close once they fill out their roster.
So it gives them a little bit more flexibility than they otherwise would have had. And to me, now the Timberwolves, with all the things that they've done last week, are thoroughly set on course in the Anthony Edwards window. Like everything they did, they said, okay, the Karl-Anthony Towns era is gone. The Anthony Edwards era is here. This is what we're doing.
Yeah, I completely agree. Now, there was a world where when the trade process, I'm sitting there looking at the cap sheet and I'm like, man, we could be like, it's crazy expensive as they are right now. We could be like a year out from Minnesota has a ton of flexibility, and it's like Edwards, McDaniels, and not much else on the books, but they went a slightly different way. I think Julius Randle, they're very much going to do the wait and see approach. If it works out really well, okay, then we're willing to talk a new deal with you. We'll figure that out. But with Gobert, they know it can work, and as much flack as the guy gets, I've never quite really figured out why everybody hates him so much. It's just, I don't. It's weird. I think maybe the over the topness of the Jazz fans led to that to some extent. But when I look at Gobert, at the very least, for beyond this season, 2 more years, you're going to get elite level rim protection and rebounding. And then that last year, that might be real ugly, but then he's an expiring contract and you could probably flip him in another trade and figure it out. But to your point, knocking 12 million off just his number alone, let's say they do, for whatever reason, end up being roughly around as expensive as they are for everybody else on the roster, it's actually going to save them in terms of real dollars, like 70 to 80 million, because they're at like a 6 to 7 times multiplier on the tax, because that's how far over they are. So just a massive savings there. And this is one of the things I kept kind of hammering home was, unless there's a thought of like Gobert and Randall come off the books either next year or the year after, and then really retool around Edwards, McDaniels, and crew, there's a world where the Wolves, this is what you do. You let the player opt out, but then you say, all right, we're going to take care of you longer term. We're going to turn your 40 million into, in this case, I kept saying 90, but into 100, but over 3 years where none of those numbers is a killer, and off we go. This is similar to kind of what I mentioned with Fred VanVleet. I think you opt him out, you turn his 40 million, we'll turn it into 90 or 100 million, but over 3 years, and your number's a lot more palatable, and we can, fit it into our cap sheet a lot easier. This is just good work by the Wolves, and remains to be seen, was the Towns trade the right move or not? We won't know that for several months yet, but hey, I think they're all in on this is Ant's team, and we're doing everything we can to hand it to him and go. And that's hard to say that's the wrong decision.
Appreciate the time, man. Thanks for jumping on.
Thanks for having me.